So against my background and involvement in these emerging markets, how do I think about economic development? Where do I think the greatest opportunities are in the world today? How does Sub-Saharan Africa and Nigeria fit into that picture? And what do I make of the ruckus currently emanating from the US? Economic growth, as we know it, is actually quite a new phenomenon. It actually began during the Industrial Revolution in Britain and a few European countries, where in the space of about 43 years, the jump in production in those countries was greater than the jump in the previous 1,000 years. It was a completely new concept. And the increase in population and life expectancy was equally unprecedented. Back in the 50s and 60s, it was fashionable to believe that high growth was dependent on adopting the institutions currently in place in the so-called West. But there were a couple of major problems with that idea. The first is that the Western countries themselves generally had vastly different institutions at their point of takeoff compared with their modern equivalents. Secondly, over the last 100 years, the number of countries experiencing accelerating growth has exploded, as has the range of institutions these countries deploy. In 1900, the number of people experiencing accelerating growth was around 300 million. By 1960, it was 2.5 billion, and by the year 2000, it was 4 billion. Today, there are 6.5 billion people in the world in countries experiencing faster growth than the average for the G7. This broadening of countries experiencing faster growth resulted in higher overall growth. Between 1870 and 1913, global growth averaged 2.1% and increased global output by 150%. Between 1970 and 2013, average growth was 3.5%, and that increased global output by 340%. And the interesting thing is that the countries that have experienced a decade or more of faster, accelerating growth have hugely varied histories, geographies, and cultural and political legacies. I'm talking about the likes of Botswana, Bhutan, Ireland, Singapore, Chile, Mauritius, India, Malaysia, Ethiopia, Uganda, Malta, Vietnam, Laos, all of Central Europe, and most of the former Soviet Union, and many, many other countries, hugely varied countries in all respects. And for many of these countries, economic success has been based on distinctly non-Western sets of institutions, including, in the extreme case, communism in China and Vietnam. A good friend of mine is one of the most widely followed economists in the world. He's a polyglot. There's extraordinarily little he hasn't read or thought about. And I recently asked him what I thought was a fairly dumb question. I said, Tyler, is there anything at all in development economics that enables us to predict growth? And his answer was a resounding no. And this tallies very strongly with my personal experience. Whenever I've been working in a country at the point of takeoff, the overwhelming conventional wisdom has been that nothing is going to change. Countries like Ireland, Poland, more recently Cote d'Ivoire, are classic examples. And even when the growth does start, and I've seen this many times, the prevailing mindset for the initial period of time is one of denial. The growth starts in these countries, the locals, investors don't believe it. They think it's temporary, they don't think it's real, they don't think it's going to be sustained. The reason for this is partly just the way our minds think. Our minds are programmed to think in a linear way. We think what happened yesterday is going to continue today, tomorrow. But the other reason for this is that we've got a good idea of the policies that support growth. So macro stability, limited obstacles to doing business, openness to foreign investment, and industrial policies that foster growth rather than cronyism, for example. But we don't know if or when politicians will adopt these policies, or let alone when they'll stick to them. In a recent book, a well-known economist, Stephen Jennings, argued that such policies take hold when local elites adopt what he called a development bargain that increases the overall economic pie and sacrifices the economic rents associated with the status quo. He cited Ghana as his leading example of a country that was about to go through this kind of transition. Unfortunately, this was just before the Ghanaian economy bombed on the back of bad policy and corruption. So in other words, development depends on this extraordinarily complex interplay between politics and policy. And the level of complexity is such that it's impossible to accurately predict development in either a positive or negative way. So does this mean it's all just a load of hot air and that growth is completely random? And why is it that ever more countries are getting on the bandwagon of accelerating economic growth? I think of growth as a virus, a very positive virus, that over the last 200 years has spread to more regions, all regions of the world, and virtually all countries in the world. And as the world's become more interconnected, and as information's become more ubiquitous, the demonstration effect from the world's success stories has made it harder and harder, and in most cases impossible, for other countries to ignore. And this means it's more difficult for the elites in the world's economic basket cases to sustain rent-seeking policies that are inimical to growth. The wider population becomes increasingly aware that there's simply a better way. It's not that complicated. We just need better policy, and agitates for change. And eventually the elite themselves realise that they have a lot to gain by growing the overall economic pie. This year, 25 of the 50 fastest growing economies in the world will be African. Sub-Saharan Africa's non-resource economies will grow by 6.3% this year. That's faster than India. India, that darling investment destination everyone is talking about, will grow more slowly this year than the non-resource economies in Africa. Excluding South Africa and Nigeria, the entire region is forecast to grow by 5.2% this year. That's a lot of growth in a lot of countries, particularly given the declining growth in much of the rest of the world. Growth here in Nigeria has also picked up after an extended and frighteningly long period of zero per capita growth. The currency stabilised, and with more reform and more investor confidence, there will be more growth. With the right policy mix, Nigeria can once again be one of the fastest growing economies in Africa, just as it was in the period to 2010. The growth in Africa before the great financial crisis was accompanied by many other benefits, which we tend to forget about now. There are dramatic improvements in life expectancy. In some countries, life expectancy had jumped by 40%. There were huge improvements in health indicators. Malaria incidents, AIDS incidents had fallen by about 80%. Education enrolment, measures of reform, governance, and macro stability had all improved across the entire region as part of that growth and reform process. And I firmly believe that these trends are now being reignited and will be sustained on the basis of the pan-continental growth we're seeing today. For decades, China has been the world's factory. Today, that model is under immense pressure. Rising wages, terrible demographics, political risk, and restricted market access for the Chinese are prompting many Chinese manufacturers, and when I say many, I mean hundreds of thousands, to re-domicile. China's labour costs have more than tripled in the last decade. Africa's labour costs are 10 times lower, offering dramatic labour force savings and workforce sustainability. Meanwhile, market access is an existential issue. Africa offers the most favourable access to Western markets, particularly the US, and the Chinese manufacturers are moving fast. Our Chinese sales team engages with over 1,000 Chinese companies. There's not a day that goes by where we don't have multiple Chinese companies visiting our sites. Every week or so, we're doing another deal with a Chinese partner. This is a photo of a Kenyan worker in full care medical facility in our factory at Tatu City in Kenya. Full Care is one of the world's largest suppliers of medical garments. This facility serves Africa, Europe and the US and employs 1,800 Kenyan workers. Phase 2, which sits on a 54-acre site, I don't know if you've ever seen a 54-acre factory, but it's big, will create a further 7,000 jobs in the next few months. Many similar Chinese clients are setting up in our other projects, and many are coming to Alaro City here in Lagos. Let's talk about service jobs. This is a photo of the largest call centre in Sub-Saharan Africa, also at Tatu City. 15 months or so, that building didn't exist. It's run by CCI Global, a leader in call centre services, and they completed this 5,000-seat ultra-modern building last year, providing jobs and training for thousands of Kenyans. The next phase of their expansion next year will provide another 4,000 seats. 95% of the end clients are blue chip US companies, so the likes of United Airlines, AT&T, JetBlue, Avis, and many, many others. And when those African workers with their US clients are benchmarked against US call centre workers, despite all the supposed language and cultural differences, on service metrics, the African workers consistently outperform the Americans. That's before we even start talking about cost differences. Business process outsourcing or BPO workers in Sub-Saharan Africa are 50% cheaper than the Philippines and India. And to give you an idea, there are 1.6 million BPO jobs just in the Philippines, but provide superior service levels and lower attrition rates. The workforce is much more stable and employer replacement costs much lower, resulting in better service and much higher BPO returns. Not surprisingly, other major BPOs are moving to Alaro City and our other projects across Africa. Nigeria's abundant cheap labour means it may be the biggest winner in the movement of potentially millions of BPO jobs to Africa. And when we take global clients, excuse me, maybe BPO clients, maybe software companies, maybe education institutions, when we take them into that facility, they see the quality of the infrastructures, they see the quality of the workforce, the penny drops. All those biases they have about what can't happen in Africa suddenly go away.